Okay, so I'm going to start by creating our HTML page. Let's get Git up and running for our version control. Git's in it. And here's our HTML. There's our boilerplate. I'll put in the style sheet now as well. So link, let's call it styles.css. Then coming down to a body, I'm going to use Emmet to create all the elements. So first thing we're going to need is a div with a class of frame, and then within that I want to create a couple of radio buttons. So use the greater than symbol for child elements, and then I'm going to have input.radio for the class. Coming on to the attributes, which we put in square brackets, I'll have a name for the group, let's call it flip, and a type of radio, and an ID of radios 1 and 2, so I'll put a $sign in there, and then we can create that sequence using the multiplication and the number that we want, so that'll specify 2 radio buttons. And underneath that, so using an adjacent selector, I'm going to have a couple more divs for the front and back, so let's call those side 1 and side 2, so side hyphen $, and some text content for that will just read this is side 1 and side 2. I have 2 of those, and another couple of elements. We need the labels, so label dot flip label for the class. For the attributes we need to put in the for and assign it to the radio buttons, so radio $, and then the text content I'll just have the actual side, requesting 2 of those. So I'll comment that out just so we've got that for reference. Copy it down here and tab, and there we go, there's our basic elements. So moving on to the CSS next. So creating our style sheet, styles.css. We'll start with the root element. And we'll put a variable in here for the panel size. So let's call that pic size, and we'll have that as 250 pixels. Coming down to our body and the elements within that, I'll give them all the same background colour, so background colour linen. I'll text align to center as well, and then I'll set a border for everything, so 1 pixel solid dark slate grey. Then coming down to our frame, I want to specify the width so it doesn't span the entire page, and I'll have the minimum required for the content, and then also I'll set some margins as well, so 50 pixels top and bottom, and then auto left and right, which will center the frame. And then for side 1 and side 2, I just need to specify the width and the height, so using that variable as pic size, and the same for the height as well, so it's square. And then just moving on to our labels, so flip label. I want the background colour to be light grey, so I'll overwrite the linen colour that we set for everything, and I'll have the foreground colour as dark slate grey. So this is the text basically. I want to style these to look like buttons. I also need to set the display to inline block, so I can set the width, which I'll have as 50% for each label. Okay, save that. Let's have a look. And that looks okay. Clicking on the labels, you can see the radio buttons at the top toggling. You'll notice it's put label 2 underneath label 1 instead of alongside it. That's because of the box sizing property. So the border of the labels is excluded from the 50%, so when it puts that in, there isn't room for it and it has to put it underneath. So we set box sizing to border box. Let's have a look now. And they're side by side. Okay, that's it. Let's commit those changes to Git. So Git add the stages, Git commit, let's just call this setup, and tag. Next we're going to move on to the rotation animation. Okay, so we'll start by hiding the radio buttons and animating the labels. So radio 1 and radio 2 will have their display set to none, and then the flip labels, we're going to use the active pseudo class. So this is what will happen when somebody clicks them. We'll use the transform to rescale. So let's resize it to 95%, and we'll shift it a bit as well. So let's have a 3 pixel movement to the right and down. Put a transition on the label so the action's smooth. 0.1 seconds all, and let's have a look at that. So there you go, you can see the buttons moving and the radio buttons have disappeared as well. And now moving on to the rotation, I'll come up to side 2 and I'll flip that over. So side 2, transform and rotate on the y-axis by 180 degrees. And coming down to the radio buttons, the radio buttons will control the rotation, not the actual labels. So starting with radio 2, which takes us to the back, I'll use the checked pseudo class, and I'll chain this using the sibling selector to side 1 to start with, and we'll transform that and rotate it 180 degrees, and then similarly to side 2 I want to rotate that to 0 degrees so it's front on, and then add the transition to the sides. So let's have 1 second linear. Let's have a look at that. There we go, there's the basic rotation. And we need to add some perspective to that, and the perspective goes onto the frame, which is the parent element of the elements that have the animation. So we use the perspective property. If we just put a low property like that, 1 pixel, what you get is a really crazy effect. So look at this. So it's just trial and error. The higher the number, the less dramatic the effect. So I tried 1000 pixels, which was alright. There we go, and that looks better. Next we'll come on to positioning. So what we've got at the moment is side 2 underneath side 1, and we want it on top of it. So we can fix that using positioning. So position will be absolute, and we need to shift that up to the top of the frame, so top 0. Then coming up to the frame, which is the hosting element, we need to set the position to relative for that. And then if we look at that, we can see that side 1 disappears when we rotate it, and we can just see the back of side 2. So we need to fix that with back face visibility. So we set that to hidden. There we go. And that's the basic rotation. So let's add the stages and commit that. Tag also. And next we'll come on to the shadows.